I took it way too far and created some fungus generator stuff with that after all. But we're gonna be focusing on the hairs now. I will move my microphone a little bit closer. There we go. That should be better. Right, so hairs. We went over the particle systems to create hairs, and we also got a little bit into the geometry nodes, how to get started and how to use that. I deleted the entire mushroom geometry nodes again because we're going to be starting from scratch to create those hairs. For two reasons. One, because it's always nice to start fresh, because the previous time we already messed up some of the sculpting with the hairs. We made some of them long just to play around with it to show a little bit what geometry nodes are capable of. I like to start fresh when we're going to be creating something different. And number two, I had another reason for it. What was it again? Um, yeah, we're gonna make much shorter hairs now, and it's gonna be way easier to just start that over. All right, so we've got our Totoro hair, and I'm going to enable my screencast keys for you guys, so you can follow me around. There we go. And just like last time, we're gonna select it, press Shift A, and we're gonna go to the curve, and we're gonna add an empty hair, and that will right away add a new geometry node system to the hairs, right? And you can find the hairs in the top right, under your Totoro main. Remember, we have our main body named now properly. That's nice. And we've got the curves, and that basically will be the hair system. All right, to add the hairs, we have to select the curves. We switch from object to the sculpt mode, and now we can do whatever. We already went over some of these tools here today. We're not going to be using a lot of them. All that we need to keep in mind is that we have the count of the curve at least set to like 3. Otherwise, we have 1 point of a curve, and we can't really move that around if we want to add curves, for example. All right, so we need a little bit more resolution in that curve. How I'm going to add hairs is actually with a density brush. So we're gonna move down this one with the little red dots. It's called density. All right, and that's basically going to add the hairs in a certain density, and I've explained it in the last time as well, so I'm not gonna go over that again. But we're gonna change some of the settings. Number one, the minimum distance. I'm gonna set this to around 0.03. And let's see, we're gonna open up the curve shape, and we're gonna see how many points we have. All right, so I don't want this to be too low. Remember, we need some resolution, but I don't want it to be too high either, because then we're gonna be putting some pressure on our computers, and that's gonna be bad. So I'm gonna set this to 5 for now. We can resample that later if we need that. All right, so we don't have to enable anything else here right now. The length, the shape, we don't have any of those yet. So we're just gonna start with a blank canvas. All right, so let's paint in some density. All right, so if we now paint in density, you can see we're gonna be adding some hairs in a certain density. Wherever we brush, there's gonna be hairs. So we're gonna brush the entire Totoro with hairs that are quite closely packed together. And the reason why is, well, I want the hairs to be easier to control, right? If I want, for example, a little bit more hair or longer hair right there on the right side, I want to be able to control that. So I'm going to add a nice bunch of hair. And we can always decrease that density later on. Remember, this is all procedural, what we're doing. And that means that it can be edited later on in like a brick by brick kind of manner. All right, so just painting your density, doesn't matter how large your brush is. Just make sure not to hit the eye sockets and the mouth. Otherwise, we're going to be cleaning up some of that stuff. All right, so this is a very organic process, painting in those hairs. It is wherever you're painting the hairs, that is where they will show up. So you got to be showing your hairdresser skills a little bit here. I'm doing it with a mouse and keyboard. You can do it with whatever you have in store for your computer. All right, let's do the face. I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit, and I'm gonna make sure to avoid the eyes and the mouth. I don't want to get too close, otherwise those hairs are gonna be all up in that mouth. And we don't like having hairs in our mouths, do we? Let's get those ears where we're at it as well. Let's move around the eye sockets inwards. And don't worry if you hit one of the eye sockets. We can delete hairs as well. It's no problem. And the ear, here we go. Gonna quickly finish this up right there. And just make sure that you didn't miss any spots. So go into top view as well. Add some more hairs there. Go into bottom view. Get those feet as well if you want. And the in-between areas there. Let's also get that. And now we've got this quite a solid system of hair showing up. Right on the sides, on the side of the head, there's missing some hairs. Alright, so this is a nice even amount of density throughout our Totoro. Alright, so let's delete some of those hairs. It's the red one above the density. And you can just click on the hairs that you want to be removed. Right, a few of those there. I think this one is a bit too close. Just gonna delete that one as well. And I'm just gonna delete them around the nose as well. Why not? We can always add them back. This. And this one is a little bit close to the mouth as well. So that is pretty much it. We're now gonna shape those hairs. Alright, so remember we've got the comb brush, which basically means we can comb our hairs into the directions we need them to be. And that is a very free-handing tool, very organic as well. Alright, so wherever you paint those hairs to go, so if I want, for example, a nice looking, I don't know what it's called, this kind of shape on top, then it's gonna look like what you groom right here. So make sure that the grooming you do is actually what you want to show up in the end as well. Alright, so this is looking quite beautiful. I'm just going to quickly go over this. We did the same thing for the particle systems, right? We did the sculpting of hairs before. It is pretty much the same kind of work. But a little bit different because we can control more of the hairs. There's more tools here to use later on. Alright, so I'm going to paint all this to the left a little bit. And the main difference between particle systems and the geometry nodes hair system is that the hairs can actually go through your mesh here, which is a little bit annoying. But it doesn't matter because we have got the puff brush. And the puff brush basically moves the hair tips away from the mesh. Right, so if I'm just gonna brush here a little bit, you can see those hair tips are moving right out again, which is nice. Just so you know, we can use that. Alright, now let's brush all of this down a little bit. Follow the shape of the mesh. Don't worry about the hairs moving through them. And we're just gonna follow the shape of the belly there. And for the legs, we want this to move down a little bit. And for the feet, I'm probably gonna make those hairs a bit shorter. Otherwise, they are quite long for the bottoms of the feet. And let's just get started on those ears a little bit. And make sure to also go in side view, because the side view always has some weird surprises in store. For example, hairs that are moving in weird directions or are just pointing straight out like the ears there. Right, make them beautiful. Alright, just comb them down a little bit. Make sure that it doesn't look like it is too perfect, if you know what I mean. It's all organic, so we can make it nice and weird, chaotic. I'm gonna paint this a little bit to the left, to the right. You can spend as much time as you want in this mode. I will cut it short in about a minute or so, otherwise it's gonna take too much time. You know the drill by now, right? So if you want longer hairs, for example, if I want the belly hairs to be a bit longer, we can just go to the grow shrink brush and set that to the plus sign right there, the icon, and just add some length there. Right, you can click or you can hold. Make sure that you don't hold it too long. It can add quite quickly, like that. And then you can just comb that once again. Make a nice curl, for example. If you like that, sure, why not? This is all your design. All right, let's just continue from here. Right, so everything is looking quite nice. And how do we proceed, right? How do we turn this into hairs? Right now, they're just curves. All right, so if I swipe my window to the left, on the top right here, you will see that cross appear. Your mouse will turn into a little cross. That means you can hold and drag to the left, excuse me, to open up a new window. Let's set that to the geometry node editor right away, and we now have 3 nodes again, right? It's like we're gonna start from scratch, and we are pretty much. But now we are more experienced. Right, so we've got the input. We're always, most of the times, we're gonna keep the input, and we have the output, which we're also gonna keep, all right? And we have the deformed curves on surface, which is what we always have when we work with this hair system. Right, this is just a note, and make sure that your hair follow the Totoro mesh. Now, to get started with hair, we're gonna take a very different approach compared to when we made those mushrooms. Because we first need more density. We can't get away with the gaps that are between those hairs. That just doesn't work. That will show too much skin. So how do we add more hairs? Well, that's actually quite tricky. It isn't as easy as just hitting a little checkbox called children, for example, what we could do with the other particle system. We need to add some nodes, but they make sense, so don't worry. All right, so number 1, Shift A, search. And my microphone's in the way a little bit. We're gonna search for a duplicate elements. And we're gonna swipe that right in between. And a duplicate elements does exactly what it says. It just duplicates what you put into it. So right now we're putting all of those curves into it that we already had. And we can set this to spline. Right, spline is basically another word for a curve. And those are all curves that we added. So we need to set that to spline. And now we can set this, for example, to 5. If we want to add 5 more hairs for each hair. The issue is that they are all at the same location, right? They're all at the same spot. So this means that one of these curves now contains 5 identical curves, which is not really what we want. So we need to somehow change the position of those other curves. The way we do that is by pressing Shift A and searching for a set position. And just swipe that right behind that. And with a set position, we can basically change the offset of the hairs, right? The location of those hairs. But Blender doesn't really understand yet that we want each of those hairs to get a different location. So it's gonna move the entire hair system together to the right or left, which is, well, not really how it works. Right, so we have to tell Blender a little bit about how we want that to happen. Okay, so first things first. We need to capture the position of each of those curves, right? We want to split them. We want to tell Blender that we want to treat each of those duplicated elements as a separate object. So we're going to hit Shift A and search for a capture attribute. I just swipe that in between. And this has a few options, right? We have a float, integer, vector, color, boolean, and those are all basically descriptions of the value that is going to enter this node. And that isn't really that hard to understand. The float is basically a number, right? You can add 1, 1.2 decimals, whole numbers. It's basically just one number. All right, and integer is number 1, 2, 3. They can't be decimals. It is going to be like an integer. And we have got a vector. I'm not going to go over the color and boolean right now, but those are the main 3 that I use a lot. So the vector is what we need now, because we need the position, and the position has 3 coordinates. Remember, we have x, y, and z, which means we are working with a vector whenever we need the location of an object. All right, so we're gonna work with a vector, and we don't have a point, but remember, we have a spline, a curve. So that's what we're gonna be working with. Now, we have a value. We need to do something with this in order to actually move those splines. All right? So first things first, I'm going to move this to the right a little bit because we need another node in between. I'm going to hit Shift A, vector math, and I'm going to set this to scale for now. Scale, and I'm going to swipe the attribute, this one, and that's the output of the capture attribute, right? So the output of all of those splines. I'm going to swipe that into the scale. And I'm just going to swipe that vector into the offset. And nothing really happens because we have a value of 0. And we want a random value for each of those duplicated hairs, right? We want them to all have a random offset of the location so they all aren't at the exact same location. So I'm gonna drag that little bubble to the left and I'm gonna search for a random value. There we go, and right away we can see chaos appearing in our screen on the left, which is always nice to see. Now the reason is because this value is incredibly high. Right, if I swipe this all the way to the left, you can see that it's already turning into something that we need, right? Those hairs are nicely packed together, closer, and they actually look like hairs now and not like chaos. All right, so a better way to really do this is to swipe the maximum output to the left, and we're gonna add a math node. Let's see, we don't want a vector math, we want a regular math. So let's see, is that in the list? Math, and we want that to be a multiply. Let's see, can I find it like this? Math multiply. There we go. What is to be a multiply? And the reason why is because we want the minus and the maximum values of those random offsets to be the same, but one minus and one positive, right? That way we have a nice offset of those hairs. And we're gonna do that with our easy value node. All right, the value node is as easy as a value, right? We can input any value we have and just add that to, for example, that multiply node. Now we're gonna set that value to -1. Remember, we want a minus and a positive value in the minus and the plus. And we're just gonna swipe that value, that original value, into the minus. So now we have one minus and one positive value. And we can just swipe this up a little bit. And you can see that we now have a nice set of additional hairs in our system, which is just amazing. Right, so because this is very hard to control, I'm just going to swipe this to the left, and I'm going to hold shift and right mouse and just drag that line that appears through those two white lines. And that will basically add another point in that, what is it called? Like the line that connects nodes. That means we can now just add one node in front instead of having to work with two lines, which is just a little bit of an efficiency upgrade. Shift A, look for another math node, and we swipe that in between and set that to multiply. And so now we're just going to set this to a very low value, like 0.01. And that way we can just work with the value as it is like a nice number we can swipe up and down. It's way less strong now. Right, so you can see that we have more hairs now. Beautiful. Now let's just move that a little bit outwards so they overlap each other a little bit. And now we can just increase the value, for example, of that duplicate elements node. If we want more hairs, we can set that to 10. If we want even more, we can just swipe this up all the way. You can see how it works. So we can get some very fluffy results. But this is quite a lot for now. I'm going to set this to about 30 and work with that. And if your system can't handle it, just use lower amounts for now and set it to higher amounts in the final render. All right, now, how do we actually turn this into hairs? Right, if I go to my render now, to the render tab, you're gonna see that it's gonna be very, very, very scary. All right, we're gonna get thick hairs, the eyes and the mouth pretty much disappear, and this doesn't look well. So we need to pretty much define how thick those hairs need to be. And that's quite easy, actually. But first, we're gonna work on the clumping. And you may remember that from when we were working with actually hair particles. Clumping is when hairs move together at the endpoints. For example, when you're using some kind of gel or wax in your hair to style it, you will have like a little bit of clumping going on in your endpoints of the hairs. They will pretty much just come together because it's getting sticky, right? So that's what we're going to be making as well. All right, so to do that, I'm going to go back into my regular view. Here we go. And we're going to work with the scale of that offset of the hairs, right? If I decrease this, you can see that the hairs are getting closer together. And if I increase it, they're going farther away. And the thing we need is that at the tips, this scale has to be lower so the hairs move closer together. And the way we do that is with a very simple node. Shift A and search for a spline parameter. Remember, spline stands for curve. It's pretty much the same. And we now have three options we can work with. We have the vector, the length, and the index. And the length basically tells you the length of a curve. And the vector basically tells the following node at which point of the curve it is. Right? So the base of a curve will be 0, for example, and the tip of the curve will be 1. And every point in between will be between 0 and 1. All right, so that is something we can use because we want the bottom of those hairs to be, for example, the value of 1 and the tip to be 0. So we're going to swipe the vector right into that scale, and you can see right away that something is happening. But it's the reverse of what we need, because the bottom of the vector is going to be 0 and the top is going to be 1, which means that the top is going to be scaled larger than the bottom. So we have to invert this somehow. Luckily for us, there's a node for that. I'm going to swipe this to the right a bit more. And I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for, unlucky for us, there's no real invert node, so we can't just cheat our way out of this. So we have to search for a map range. And we can just swipe that in between. Now, it took me a little while to understand what this does, but it's incredibly easy. So I had been stupid for a little while, but you can basically just look at it like this. So we're inputting a value from 0 minus to 1 maximum. And what do we want the minus and maximum to become? It's as easy as that. So for example, we have our base is now 0 and our tip is 1, but we want the minus to be inverted. So we want the minus to be 1 and we want the maximum to be 0. All right, that's it. That's pretty much all we need to do for that. So now you can see we get some nice clumping going on. We actually, it looks like we used some kind of a grooming paste or whatever, but it's quite strong, right? But we can easily change that by just changing the minus value, for example, which is going to be the base. If we want this to be more close together, we can just decrease that, for example, like that. See? I don't know why it will do that. But for the tip, it is never really this close together. It's never really 0, so I'm just going to up that slightly, right? So we have at least some kind of a point, but not as strong. Beautiful. Now, this is looking quite decent, isn't it? We have some nice noise hair, some nice clumping hair, but it's all very straightforward. What we're going to do first is fix the way we see the hair in rendered view, because we can't be working with those thick-ass noodles. So, how are we going to do that? Very easy. Very easy indeed. We're working with curves. We want a mesh. We want an object. So we're going to press Shift A, search, curve to mesh. There we go. Swipe that in between. And now right away we're going to get some black curves because we don't have an actual profile curve. So if you want to make a mesh from a curve, you need a curve and you also need the profile of the curve, right? That's going to be like the cross section of the curve. So we can basically just add a circle for that. So press Shift A and search for a curve circle, all right? And set that somewhere. And now we have two values that we have to take care of. The radius of 1 meter is quite high for our hair. 1 meter is not nearly as low as we need it to be. So I'm going to set this to about 0.01 for now, and we'll see later how that looks. And we have the resolution, which is incredibly high as well. Now, what you should know is that a resolution of 3, which is going to be 3 points, so it's basically going to be a triangle, it is enough to make your object look like a circle, because we're going to be shading it smooth, right? And that means that Blender is going to try to just add some smooth shading on those corners, and turns out that a triangle is all you need for that, so we can get away with a very low resolution hair. So we can just connect that to the profile curve now. And it's going to take a little while, hopefully not crash. I should have decreased my amount of hairs a little bit before I did this. Should be fine though. Right, Blender, hello. Alright, this is not looking good. Give it a second. Second to breathe. No clue why it's having such a difficult time. It's not like I'm adding that much. Alright, something is happening. But it ain't good. Let's go back to solid view and see what's happening. Alright, so we've got some curves going on. Let's zoom in a little bit. Alright, so we just basically need to make it even less thick. So 0.005. Let's see how that looks. Is it gonna crash on me again? Let me see if I have any other programs. No. Alright, so I'm just going to decrease the amount for now. Just so we don't have that much trouble working with Blender. Right, so let's just leave that at maybe 5 for now. And we may also just have to decrease the amount of points in the curve. And the way we do that is by just swiping this to the left and hitting Shift A and adding a resample curve in between. Alright, I'm not gonna right away add that because I want the count to be very low. So I'm gonna set the count to about 3 and then I'm gonna swipe that in between. And it means that our curves are getting more blocky, but it also means that we're just going to be having a much easier time in Blender. It's gonna take some of that system performance issues away from us. Alright, so this is fine. That's looking quite decent. And let's just fill the caps of those curves while we're at it. Fill that up. And we may not even need a mesh, to be honest. Let's see. Let's see what happens if I just connect the position there. Go to rendered view. And let's just play around with the curve, right? This is just me trying something. Okay, let's hit Shift A and search for a curve radius. Swipe that in between. And let's just connect that same spline parameter, so the vector that we used for the map range as well. Let's just connect that to the radius and see what happens. Let's go out of the rendered view for a second. And another thing we need is to just control that value, right? So I'm going to press Shift A, hit a math node in between and set that to multiply. And let's just set it to about 0.01 for now. So we can control the radius of that hair. And let's just go into the rendered view now and see how that looks. All right, so that's already way faster. All right, so let's just work with this. Converting it to a mesh is a little bit too hard for the computer for some reason right now. So this is fine. Now, this is all inverted as well. So what we can just do is connect the map range we made previously to that multiply node, and it should fix all of our issues. Oh, that's not right. It is connecting both of them. We only need one. There we go. So now we actually have some hairs that look better. Let's make them a little bit thinner, 0.005. Even thinner, 0.003. Alright, so that's already looking way better. They're still a little thick, 0.001. That's looking great. Alright, so this is going to be our base hair setup. And let's see if, now that we're using a curve, we can actually crank back up this resample curve. Yeah, that looks like exactly what we need. Let's go about 30. And let's swipe this to the left a little bit. All right, there we go. This is going to be like the curve hair system that we're going to work with. Now, if we want to add a material in this hair system, we have a node for that. Shift A, search, set material. And we can just hit enter and swipe that after the curve radius. And now we can select what kind of material we need for that. And we can just select, for example, the hair material that we made previously. And there we go. It's going to turn those hairs the color that we want them to be. And that is nice. All right, so as you can see, we still don't have that many hairs actually. So let's see if we can change that up a little bit. Let's go into our regular view. There we go. And let's actually just expand this value a little bit in the positive direction. Just like that. And see if we... All right, so I actually increased the wrong number there. I'm going to increase the duplicate elements. There we go. So now we actually get some thick looking hair. That is amazing. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to be playing with hairs way more. But for now, I feel like we need to move on a little bit. All right, so what I will show you is how to add some good looking curves. Because who doesn't love some curly hair? All right, so let's get into that as well. So we have our curve radius. That is something we need in the end, right? So we want to add the thickness at the end of the geometry node setup. The thickness, we want the position. This is going to be the node after which we can do some fun stuff, right? So this is the one that actually duplicates the elements, and now we can do fun stuff. The first thing that we need to do, and I'm going to show you this, I'm going to set this to 5, is actually move the starting points of our hairs back to the mesh, all right? Because they're floating in space, and that is not how hair works. So what we're going to do is Shift A, set position. This is a very easy one. We're going to swipe that there, and we want the beginning of those curves to be moved to the Totoro. Right, so what we're going to do is find the Totoro main in this right window, left click, and just swipe that into our geometry nodes. So now we have the information of that object. It's that easy. And we're actually going to use the geometry of Totoro now. All right, so hit Shift A, and we're going to search for our geometry proximity. And that's basically going to calculate what the closest point is from a hair, right? So what is the closest point from, for example, this hair to Totoro, and we can use that to move the hairs to the surface of Totoro. Very easy. All right, so we're going to use the geometry of Totoro as the input of the proximity node, and we want to use the position output as the position of the set position hairs. All right, so there's one issue, and that's that it is moving all the points of all the hairs to the Totoro surface, but we only want the beginning of the curve there, so these starting points. And now there's an easy note for that as well. Shift A, end point selection, and we can just set the end size at 0. We just need that start size of 1, which means it's going to be selecting the first point in a curve, the start. And we can just hit that selection and smoothen that over into the selection of the set position. And now it will move all the starting positions of our hairs to the mesh of Totoro. No matter how crazy or how long those hairs get, the starting positions will always be on Totoro, which is what we need as well. Nice. All right, so last thing for today, and then we will be almost finished with that hair, I guess. Is add some noise, some curls, right? Because this is all very static, especially if I remove the clumping, right? That what I explained to you before. For example, if I set that to 1 as well, it's very static, right? Very, very uninteresting to look at. So we're gonna be adding some noise to those hairs to make it look more chaotic, more like fur. Reason is, well, Totoro is, I guess, some kind of animal or something. So let's just make it a bit more like animal fur. Like it's not, I'm not showering that often. Like there's dirt going to be trapped in the hair. It's gonna make it look more chaotic, more rough. So let's get on that as well. So we're gonna hit Shift A, set position. And we're going to swipe that after the final set position, right before the curve radius. And this set position is what we're going to be using to move the points of all the hairs to a little bit of a random position. And we're going to base that out of a noise texture. So hit Shift A and search for a noise texture. And the beauty of a noise texture is that it pretty much can be used everywhere in Blender. You use it for materials, you use it for weight painting, and you use it for hairs. Noise textures are the best. I use it for pretty much everything. So we have a noise texture, and we want this to control the position, the offset of each point of the hair. So we can just swipe that in there, like that. Now, this is not what we need exactly, but it is getting chaotic and rough. So it's one thing. But it moves the entire hair mesh somehow to the top left, right? It's not on Totoro anymore. So, how do we fix this? We need to hit Shift A, search for a vector math, and swipe that in between. Set this to subtract, and set the vector to 0.5. That is just something that happens in Blender, right? If your mesh moves for some reason to the top right, to the top left, you basically always need to subtract 0.5 from the vector. Alright, now we got our hairs, but they are incredibly chaotic. So, we're gonna fix that. And we can fix that entirely with that noise texture. For example, if I set the scale to 1, you can see that the noise changes as well. Alright, so I can just make this noise wiggle. I can make the hairs wiggle and just make it as big as we need. Alright, for example, something like that. Now it's way too strong, so what we can do is hit Shift A and search for another vector math and swipe that behind that subtract node. And we can just set this to scale, for example, and we can just reduce the scale of that noise texture of the strength. Right, so for example, let's not set it too strong, but just a little bit. So let's zoom in on the arm and see what happens if we crank this up and down. All right, that's not bad at all. Now we don't really have that much geometry that we can work with for this noise texture because we only have 3 points of the curve. So if I increase that, you can see that we are getting more and more roughness in those curves, right? So remember that as well. So I'm gonna set this to, I don't know, maybe 5 counts for now. That's looking great. And let's just increase our duplicate elements as well. Set that to like 20. And let's just go to our rendered view. And let's just see how this looks. Right, so we're at least adding some nice looking rough hairs on our Totoro. We have to add way more in the render. I think it should be possible for me to just add like 100 now. Now that we're not using actual mesh anymore. Right, so now we have some very fluffy hairs on our Totoro. And the fun thing is that we can just tweak that whenever we want. So if we go to the sculpt mode and we can just grab that comb brush and we can just move our hairs, for example. We can make it look nice and just change the entire look of the hair procedurally, which is very nice, which is something we couldn't do with the particle system. Remember when we groomed it after we changed all of the settings, the hairs pretty much went rogue. So this is better for example, procedural stuff. If we want to change things, for example, those hairs, they are overlapping our mouth. We can just groom that to the left now. All right, which is perfect because that way Totoro won't be tasting his own hairs. Right, so you can just groom this all you want. Have fun with it after your so it will basically first take your grooming into account and then the geometry nodes, which is nice. All right, so we moved some of these hairs out of the way, maybe a little bit more. Let's try to get all of those hairs a little bit out of Totoro, and we can always just remove some of those that are being annoying. All right, just minus it. All of the hairs that are getting close, we can just delete those. Or even better is that we can just make them shorter now. Right, so just grab that. Where is it? Where is it? Grow shrink. And just shrink the hairs around the mouth, around the face, Oh, I'm growing it out. Let's shrink it. Shrink all of those hairs a little bit. Just like that. Just like that. Just make it a little bit shorter on the face. Stuff like that. It's very easy to control now, which is nice. All right. So that is going to be the hair geometry node tutorial pretty much. I want to add some more fun details in the future. For example, if I look at the arms, there are usually some hairs that will stick out, be rogue on the hair, right? We can all remember days where our hair is chaotic in the morning and some of the hairs are just sticking out. So that is something that happens to animals as well. So we're gonna be adding some wild hairs, some rogue hairs that are just sticking out and refuse to go with the flow of the rest of the hairs. All right, so that's what we're going to be adding. And of course, we also have to worry about where the texture is of the hair, right? We added that material, but remember, we actually have a texture beneath that that has the texture of Totoro. So we need to incorporate that in our Totoro as well. All right, so that's going to be it for today. I hope you learned something about the use of geometry nodes for hairs. It's a very nice way to add hair and to make it procedural as well, right? It fixes most of the issues that we had with the other hair system. Both are okay to use, but this one is just a little bit more free in the end. All right. Are there any questions about this?